No airport, no regular flights. The nearest land is 1,500 miles away, and the only way in is a boat that takes 6 days, if the ocean allows it at all. By the end of this video, you'll know why fewer than 250 people live on the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, and why they were all evacuated from it once already by a volcano that erupted right behind their homes. You'll see why this island exists at all, because of Napoleon Bonaparte, exiled on another island entirely. You'll see why almost the whole population shares just 8 surnames. And you'll see why, after being flown to safety in England with an entire modern world at their fingertips, nearly everyone chose to come back. This is the story of Tristan da Cunha, the island so remote that leaving it almost never means leaving for good. This is Tristan da Cunha, home to roughly 250 people and widely recognized as the most remote, permanently inhabited island on the planet. The nearest landmass, South Africa, sits over 1,500 miles away. There is no airport here, and there never has been, which means the only way to reach Tristan da Cunha at all is by sea, a journey that typically departs from Cape Town and takes 6 or 7 days under good conditions, longer whenever the South Atlantic decides otherwise. Supply ships and the handful of passenger voyages that make the crossing each year aren't a convenience here. They're the entire connection between this island and the rest of human civilization. And when the ocean refuses to cooperate, that connection simply doesn't happen, sometimes for weeks at a stretch. To understand why anyone lives somewhere this difficult to reach in the first place, you have to go back to 1816 and to a man being held prisoner on a completely different island over 1,000 miles away. Napoleon Bonaparte had just been exiled to St. Helena following his defeat, and the British government, deeply concerned that sympathizers might attempt to use nearby Tristan da Cunha as a staging point for a rescue operation, made the decision to occupy and garrison the island purely to close off that possibility. A small British military detachment landed and secured the island, and among them was a Scottish corporal named William Glass. When the garrison was eventually withdrawn, Glass chose to stay, along with his family and a handful of others, becoming the founders of what would grow into Tristan da Cunha's permanent civilian population. In other words, this entire community exists today largely because of a security decision made about a prisoner on another island, one who likely never even knew Tristan da Cunha had been settled at all on his account. The island itself makes almost no concessions to the people who chose to stay. Tristan da Cunha is the exposed peak of a volcano rising nearly 7,000 feet straight out of the South Atlantic, and virtually the entire population lives on a single narrow strip of lower ground on the island's north side, the only spot flat and sheltered enough to support a permanent settlement at all. The rest of the island rises sharply into steep, often cloud-covered slopes, offering little in the way of usable land beyond small pastures for livestock and modest potato patches that residents have cultivated, in some cases, on the exact same family plots for generations. Everything the island cannot produce for itself, and that is most things beyond potatoes, mutton, and fish, has to arrive by that same undependable sea route from Cape Town. The population that grew from that small founding group over the following decades remained extraordinarily isolated by nearly every measure available, and that isolation left a mark that is still visible today in the most literal sense possible. There are, at present, only 8 surnames on the entire island: Glass and Patterson, Hagen, Rogers and Swain, Green, and Lavarello and Repetto, tracing back respectively to Scottish, Irish, English, Dutch, and Italian roots among the earliest settlers and the small number of later arrivals who joined them. The island's genealogy is so thoroughly documented and so tightly self-contained that geneticists have studied Tristan da Cunha for decades, specifically because of how traceable its ancestry is, following family lines back through nearly the entire population to a known, finite set of founding fathers and mothers in a way that is almost impossible to replicate anywhere with a larger, more mixed population. Daily life on Tristan da Cunha today revolves overwhelmingly around the sea, though not in the way it once did. Since the 1950s, the island's economy has centered on crayfish, marketed internationally as Tristan rock lobster, caught in the cold, nutrient-rich waters surrounding the island and exported to markets as far away as Japan and the United States, commanding a wholesale price of roughly $50 a kilogram. That single industry transformed what had been a largely subsistence economy, built around small-scale farming and fishing, purely to feed the island itself, into something with a genuine cash income, funding infrastructure, services, and a standard of living that would have been unimaginable to the original 19th century settlers. Even now, though, that income depends entirely on the same unpredictable shipping schedule that governs everything else here. Since every crate of lobster bound for a restaurant on the other side of the world has to leave the island the same way everything else does, by sea, on a ship that isn't always able to come when needed. Governing a community this size and this remote also looks nothing like local government almost anywhere else. Tristan da Cunha elects its own island council, which manages everything from land allocation to fishing regulation locally, in close coordination with an administrator representing the island's status as a British overseas territory. Decisions that might take months of bureaucracy elsewhere often happen quickly here out of necessity, because waiting for guidance from thousands of miles away isn't practical when a decision needs to be made before the next ship arrives or before weather closes a narrow window to complete essential work. The single most dramatic chapter in Tristan da Cunha's modern history began in August 1961, when residents started noticing frequent earth tremors shaking the settlement, followed by landslides in the hills directly behind the island's only village. By October, the geological activity had escalated dramatically, culminating in molten rock, beginning to force its way to the surface only a few hundred yards from people's homes. With an active volcanic eruption unfolding essentially in their backyard, the entire population, all 264 residents at the time, had to be evacuated, first to a nearby island and eventually all the way to England, arriving in a country most of them had never visited, and that had changed almost unrecognizably since their ancestors first settled Tristan da Cunha over a century earlier. What happened next says something remarkable about this community's relationship with the island most of the outside world would consider barely survivable, given housing, modern amenities, and access to a country with none of Tristan da Cunha's isolation or hardship. The overwhelming majority of the evacuated islanders chose to return home the moment it became possible. An advance party went back in 1963 to assess the damage and prepare the settlement, and by that November, roughly 200 residents had made the journey back to the island they had been forced to abandon less than 2 years earlier, including several Tristan-born women who had married Englishmen during their time abroad and chose to bring their new husbands back with them rather than stay in England permanently. After experiencing firsthand what life with airports, hospitals, and modern infrastructure actually looked like, most of Tristan da Cunha's people decided, deliberately and with full knowledge of the alternative, that this remote, difficult volcanic island was still the place they wanted to call home. That choice continues to define the island today. Modern Tristan da Cunha has a small hospital, a school, and basic infrastructure funded largely through crayfish exports and support from the United Kingdom, since the island remains a British overseas territory. But none of that infrastructure changes the fundamental math of living somewhere this far from anywhere else. A medical emergency requiring treatment beyond what the island's small clinic can provide still means waiting for a ship, or, in genuinely urgent cases, arranging a military or specialized evacuation flight capable of reaching an island with no runway of its own. A part needed for essential equipment, a specific medication, or simply fresh produce beyond what the island's limited farmland can produce. All of it still depends on that same 6-day journey from Cape Town, on a schedule dictated by weather and shipping logistics rather than convenience. Even communication with the outside world, taken entirely for granted almost everywhere else, has only become reliable here relatively recently, with satellite internet finally offering residents something closer to normal connectivity after generations where a letter or a radio message might be the fastest way to reach anyone beyond the island at all. That shift hasn't erased the deeper isolation, though. Being able to video call a relative in England changes nothing about the 6 days it still takes to physically join them, or the fact that a genuine medical emergency still depends on the same ship, the same ocean, and the same unpredictable weather that has governed life here since William Glass first decided to stay. There's a particular kind of resolve required to keep choosing this island, generation after generation, when leaving has never actually been impossible, just difficult, Unlike some remote communities where isolation is simply an unavoidable accident of geography nobody chose, Tristan da Cunha's residents have collectively and repeatedly chosen isolation over alternatives they've directly experienced and found wanting. The 1961 evacuation wasn't a hypothetical test of what life elsewhere might offer. It was 2 years of lived experience in a country with every convenience this island lacks. And the community returned anyway, almost entirely intact, to rebuild homes within sight of the same volcano that had just tried to destroy them. So what does it actually take to sustain a community this small, this isolated, and this genetically singular, decade after decade, when every single supply run, every medical emergency, and every conversation with the rest of the world depends on a 6-day boat journey across some of the roughest ocean on the planet? Maybe the honest answer is that Tristan da Cunha was never really isolated from the people who live there. It was only ever isolated from everyone else.